our economy is going straight to hell. 2025 absolutely was an awful economic year. And all of you idiots who said Donald Trump was going to be great for the economy, way better than Vice President Kamala Harris, you probably feel real stupid right now because we know that that was an absolute lie, an absolute lie. And so let's break down what's happened with the economy. Morgan Harper joins us right now. Morgan can walk us through. She's the Director of Policy and Advocacy for the American Economic Liberties Project. And Morgan, they have been trying their best to delay these numbers. They don't want us to see it. All of a sudden, we're not realizing, guess what? Manufacturing Trump, I'm bringing it back. No, you're not. It sucked. We're seeing how across the board we've seen anemic loss. And don't you remember when we would have 150 or 180 or 200,000 job creation and Fox News would be going, "Oh my God, this is soft. This is awful." But all these downward revisions that we have seen now shows how awful this Trump economy is.
Yeah, it's really something, Roland. I mean, the top line figures that we have now that are estimates of what happened throughout all of 2025 are indicating that there were only about 500,000 jobs created for the whole year. To compare, under President Biden's last year in 2024 is about 2 million, right? So that's a huge difference. And then when we're breaking it down month by month, you're exactly right that we're only having like 50,000 jobs that are being estimated that were created this past December. Revisions down, still in the tens of thousands of jobs for November. And so there's nothing like robust job growth going on here. And again, and this is something that we've talked about before, where is the job growth that is occurring, even if it's very limited, where is it coming from? It continues to be things like social assistance, healthcare, hardly a booming business environment that's just suggesting a ton of innovation and entrepreneurship is happening. I think as one a bit of coverage that I saw today was talking about that's really just like demographic change. People are aging, they need more support. That's where you are going to see more of those healthcare jobs tend to come from, regardless of what's happening elsewhere in the economy. The other thing that is important to note in these numbers as a sign of how all is not well, despite what the White House might be trying to spin, is those that are unemployed. Unemployment is up overall from where we were at this point last year, even though there's a slight downturn in terms of the exact number from this past month. But overall, unemployment is up year over year, and particularly Black unemployment is much higher from this point last year. And those that are unemployed, they're staying unemployed longer. And that is particularly disconcerting, meaning like you're looking for a job, you're not able to find one. So you're going to stay as part of that official statistic for longer. And that's a problem, as we know. I mean, most of us are living paycheck to paycheck. The longer that you don't have one of those, then other ripple effects that are happening throughout your life, just in like a real micro way. And then, the other thing that I would note is just there is this dichotomy between what the White House is saying. I thought it was particularly interesting in a lot of their official messaging today, just how far they're having to reach for that positive spin now. You have the head of the Council of Economic Advisors, Kevin Hassett, his go-to talking point today was, oh, but those that have manufacturing jobs, they're getting paid a lot more. And it's like, well, that's interesting because, like you were noting, Roland, we've seen nothing but manufacturing job losses. So I guess his point is if you happen to be one of the few people that still has a manufacturing job, that is surely not a new one that's been created this year because their policies have not resulted in that, well, then maybe you're making a bit more money. And that's great. But the rest of the economy is not really seeing any of those gains. And again, there just has not been that follow through on this promise of bringing American manufacturing back, inspiring a new wave of innovation. Nothing in these numbers suggests that that's actually occurring.
Muted.
I love all the spin they've been doing. And in fact, I came across this video. I'm going to try to find it. Scott Bassett, they were at this event, and this woman came up and said to them point blank, guess what? My things have sucked when it comes to my life, my business because of these tariffs. And he was sitting there kind of like, uh-oh. And it's kind of like, yeah, try to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the important point here is they're going to try to, take this little bit of the official data that's coming out of these numbers. And I thought, of course, interesting again that the president does not care about the rules around any of this. He's not supposed to talk about any of this data before the official release so that it doesn't inappropriately influence the market investors. They did that anyway because they are probably so concerned about how, these numbers were not suggesting anything positive or, aligning with what they claim they're accomplishing here. And people are not having to, but are able to confront that imaginary picture that they're trying to paint with reality. And yeah, I mean, small business, I'm sure all of us, we're all living. I know I have had these conversations in Columbus of like, oh yeah, business owner used to carry that, can't carry that anymore. Tariffs, it's just too expensive. Folks that are having to close up shop altogether. And more importantly, and that, I think this is the widespread type of impact, is just that uncertainty that people don't know exactly what's going to happen. And so they're not able to move or invest in any particular way. And, and the other risk I would point to here, and this was starting to be covered a bit more in some of the data today around like the impacts of AI. We all know, AI is afoot. It's gonna, lead to some gains in productivity in a lot of working environments. It is, definitely having an impact in some of the job numbers. Just, some professional services are no longer going to need as many people if they're using, AI software and such. And so, but we're not able to really parse out what's the what there if we have a government that's injecting all of this unnecessary uncertainty while we have to kind of grapple with this technology that is there, that is having an impact, that we need to figure out what exactly that is so that government can play a better role in leveling things off to make sure that we're all, staying as stable as possible. I think that's a risk that, we're not always taught. We certainly, you and I haven't been talking about every month, but it's something for us to continue to draw attention to, in that AI conversation and how this connects to the jobs data.
Questions from our panel. Let me start with you, Michael.
All right, Morgan, you just hit on one of the questions that I had dealing with artificial intelligence and eliminating jobs. The other question that I had is when we look at, for instance, September 2024, Goldman Sachs put out a statement. They analyzed both Trump and Kamala Harris's economic plans, and they said that Kamala Harris's plans would give the biggest boost to the economy. And they talked about how Trump's proposed tariffs on imports and tighter immigration policies would really destroy the economy. What feedback are you hearing from African Americans specifically on how they are trying to navigate throughout all this? We're looking at unprecedented unemployment for African Americans in the past few years. We're looking at energy prices up 13%, beef prices up, coffee, et cetera. What are you hearing from African Americans on the ground?
Well, I think it's interesting because, a lot of us probably don't have the expectation that the government's always going to be working in our best interest, I would say, as a community. And so I think in certain ways, we're kind of prepared to be surprised and the unexpected in a certain way. So psychologically, maybe that puts us in a slightly better position than the average person that is used to maybe living with that illusion or expectation that somebody's going to be taking care of you, looking out for you. That being said, I mean, I'm hearing that people think what's going on is crazy and that there is no way to make this all add up. So, like you're saying, Mike, we have, the uncertainty around tariffs, that those costs are having to be passed on certain goods and all sorts of businesses that we're going to based on how this administration chose to implement tariffs. That is not inevitability, right? There is a version of doing better trade policy, tariff policy that would not go like this. That is not what they decided to do. In addition to some things that are never going to be reflected in this data that we're talking about, like energy costs, like utility prices. And I think the important point here is to emphasize, like, none of this is inevitable. None of this is necessary. Even when we're talking about AI, right? We're kind of like just hearing AI, it's happening. We got to just deal with it. It's like, well, no, we have a government that can pass laws that kind of decides the rules of the road, even for something like an innovative technology, like how that's actually going to be playing out in our economy and our society. But unfortunately, that is not what this government's trying to do. I think the other thing I would note is, when we're looking at, I mean, I don't have all the ins and outs of exactly what Kamala Harris was proposing, but I can guarantee you that there were some elements of it that were also looking at what we call like the supply side of things. So, it's interesting, this proposal that's come up from Trump, that you all might have seen some coverage of around like buying up more of these mortgage-backed securities, bonds to try to lower interest rates. And then that's going to solve the housing crisis. Like, this is their big housing plan. It's like, well, okay, but y'all aren't doing anything to address actually like what's going to be necessary to build housing. So similar to the job market, they're doing all these things. They're like, oh, we're going to, manufacturing, and we're going to keep, supporting all these businesses. But it's like, we're going to cut back on immigration, but you're not doing anything to address the supply side here. So it's not that you don't want to do tariffs at all. It's not that a lot of us don't care about having better immigration policy. I think a lot of us do. But if you're going to put in these real, extreme approaches, and then you don't do anything on that supply side to, train people up or make sure that we're impacting the number of people that are available to take on any jobs that are being created, or incentivize businesses to want to create those jobs, well, then you are just setting people up for absolute devastation. And I do think that, that's what I'm hearing from a lot of people, that they're kind of worried that's where we're headed. And there's not a lot of ways to maneuver to protect yourself in that environment.
All right, thanks.
Candace.
So there are a lot of people who graduate these days with computer science degrees, and they're so behind because technologies move so fast. By the time they get a job or not get a job, they're just behind. So I'm wondering, for people who are, looking into areas to go to in terms of studying, where are the hot jobs coming in 3 to 4 years? What will a good degree look like? Because it certainly isn't computer science. I mean, there's so many statistics and headlines out there about that, but where do folks go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And, I've been, and certainly not a workforce expert or anything like that, but I have been hearing the same covers that you're talking about with the computer science degrees, now being somewhat less necessary, less in demand, just based on the advances in technology. And more than anything, we are going to need people that do have critical thinking skills and an ability to still be able to write and work through complex problems and deal with lots of different kinds of people. Something we would call like a liberal arts education, and it's out of vogue in this administration, and not just this administration. I mean, it's a movement across the country that's kind of pushing back on those. But I do think that there continues to be a need to invest in people, regardless of what circumstances you might be born into. If they want to pursue an education, higher education, that pathway is available to them without getting in a bunch of debt. That being said, completely support and do think, and this is something we were seeing a lot under the last administration, under the Biden administration, an investment in trades. And if we, have, the types of policies that were happening under the Inflation Reduction Act, incentivizing solar investment in solar energy that then requires people to have the training to be able to install that in building trades. That is going to continue to be necessary, where there's a shortage of people that have the skill set to be able to just be plumbers and be electricians and have some of these, skills that are more in that trades category. But that requires a government investment to make sure that people have those resources. And this is another thing I've heard on the ground. I mean, it's been very, very hard to hear. Some of these job training programs that were getting that funding through the big federal legislation just immediately disappeared, with all the Doge business. And then they cannot afford to put on those programs. I've heard from folks in Columbus that that's happening too. So, you all talk about it. We all talk about it a lot. Elections matter. We need to get things back on under control, on track with just, maybe we don't all agree on exactly what the solutions are, but we need to have people in these positions that are even trying to figure out and understand what the problem is to explore what those solutions could be.
Thank you.
Well, the election, I think, is going to be a huge issue comes the midterm elections in November. And if Democrats, they want to regain the House, they should be hammering these folks by saying, guess what? You let Donald Trump do whatever he wants to do on tariffs. Now you see the problem, when in fact Congress actually can be controlling tariffs. And so the GOP, you put your fate in the hands of Trump, you're going to suffer the consequences. And so it had better be a strong economic message. But not just that, Morgan. What Democrats also have to be saying is, What are we going to do when we regain power? It can't just be they suck.
Completely. And, I think we have a great example from this week, Roland, with, Trump coming out saying he wanted to ban institutional investors from buying up, single family homes across the country, right? So this is like, private equity, large corporations being able to dominate regional housing markets.
Which, of course, that was one of the ideas of Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yes, and there have been a couple of bills introduced by Raphael Warnock and other Democratic senators.
And in fact, Democrats tried to do that last year, and Republicans voted against it.
Yes, but the point I agree. The point I was going to make, though, is, and I think we can agree on this, that is not something, though, that every Democrat across the board was willing to talk about. Even we're talking about something like taking on private equity and some of the impacts that it's having in the economy. Even as recently as a couple of years ago, I think that was a controversial thing that some people were like, that's a little too much. I don't want to go that far. And I think we should all take as like a very clear direction that we have, Trump that's coming out here, even if it's not sincere, even if he doesn't follow through, even if some Democrats were talking about before, that there is no reason to hold back on any front with ideas that we think are going to have an impact that is for the good for our community, for this country. We should not be afraid. We should not be timid. We got to go for the absolute jugular here as we're looking ahead to 26 and 28.
I agree 100%. Morgan, always great to see you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
At the end of the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, Dr. King stood in front of the Alabama State House and told 25,000 Americans that the greatest threat to the greedy oligarchy is when poor blacks and poor whites and others mobilize together and form a voting bloc that can fundamentally shift the economic architecture of our nation. In America today, we have fewer voting right protections than we did when the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. And state legislatures have abused their power to try to pick their voters rather than let the voters pick their legislators. Meanwhile, every day people are suffering while the greedy get richer and richer. Dr. King was right, and many others were right. The billionaires who think they can buy our politicians are afraid of people coming together across dividing lines and building power together. In 2013 and 2014, we together in this state built out the Moral Monday movement. And in 2014, more than 80,000 people showed up in Raleigh for a mass people's assembly. We mobilized our power. We mobilized our vision. We did not continue to just resist what others were doing. We claimed the world that we wanted, the society that we wanted. And what we did energized. It was not partisan, it was principled. Here we are again now in 2026. And it's time to love forward together and mobilize. This is our Selma moment. And we need everybody, regardless of your race, your creed, your color, your religion, your sexuality, whoever you are. If you love voting rights for all, if you love abolishing poverty and bringing into reality living wage, if you love health care for all, if you love and grace and mercy and do not want to buy into the religious nationalism of hate and meanness and a lack of empathy, if you want to love forward together, welcoming immigrants rather than suffering ICE raids, if you love the environment and want to see it cared for rather than the polluters taking over, if you love fully supported public education, if you want to love, not hate, and to have peace and not war, to stand against unchecked militarization and the militarization of our cities, then it is time to come together and mobilize our power and our passion for justice. Then we now are in a moment where we must move from resistance to loving forward and mobilizing our power. So from February 11th through the 14th, North Carolinians are going to be walking and marching and caravanning from Wilson to Raleigh. And on Saturday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, we will hold a massive people's assembly for a moral agenda in Raleigh, North Carolina, saying it is time to love forward together. We are marching from a district that MAGA extremists, because of a call from President Trump, decided to gerrymander the 1st Congressional District, take it away from the people. And we are inviting all defenders of democracy and champions of the common good to meet us in Raleigh on February 14th to reclaim a moral agenda, an agenda for going forward, to pursue the society and the democracy that we want, not only for ourselves, but for our children's children. For somebody's been hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be quiet anymore. We will love forward together.